You ever heard the saying, "It sounds too good to be true"? Like the businessman from Nigeria who sends you an email that he needs you to help him with millions of dollars. Or the loan that you can get today only to pay off your debts with an APR as low as 2.5%. We all discover that these scams, or they have to pay attention to the fine print, only to find out that there are hoops and hurdles that stand in the way of it truly being a great deal. We see all those kinds of things every day in our secular lives. But is there a deal that's too good to be true in terms of a theological basis? When we explain Christianity on a very oversimplified level, that Jesus Christ came into this world, paid the price for our sin, rose for our salvation, and all this is offered for free if you will just believe. I have had this conversation numerous times over the last 30 years with non-believers, and almost all of them respond in the same way at first. It sounds too good to be true. It can't be that easy. But why? Partly because such too good to be true claims in our secular life set us up for doubt and skepticism. Partly because the church itself over the centuries has misrepresented the simplicity of the free gift of salvation by adding on burdensome fine print of our own. Whatever the causes for the disbelief, we cannot escape this notion that out in the world there's a message that the gospel sounds like there must be a catch. Well, what about before there were gospels? What about to the people of the Old Testament? Would this first reading of Psalm 121 sound like something that's too good to be true? At first glance, perhaps, it sounds like a promise that just is too good to be true. As a believer, when trouble or hardship or persecution come my way, God will come and rescue me so that no harm will ever come to me. To a Hebrew living in Jerusalem, sometime between 1000 BC and the time of Jesus, that'd be a welcome hope, a wonderful dream, but it was not reality. After Solomon, Israel experienced the Assyrian invasion and exile, from which very few ever returned. Israel then came under the control of the Assyrians, then the Egyptians, the Babylonians, yet another exile, then the Persians and the Greeks and the Romans. There were plagues and famines, earthquakes and floods. Exactly how was a resident of Israel supposed to believe the message of Psalm 121? Well, for that matter, how should we believe it? Well, maybe they and we need to see and hear the psalm in a different light, one that displays the true structure and use of Psalm 121. When reading this in Hebrew, it appears that there are actually two people speaking in a sort of proclamation and then respond. Verses 1 and 2 are the words of a faithful disciple, and you and I can hear his voice using the pronouns I and my. I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. But then, starting in verse 3, the pronouns change, as if someone nearby who has heard the disciple is now responding to his statement. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. He who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time and forevermore. It's important to remember that the Psalms are poetry, and they're to be understood differently than if this were some sort of legal agreement. This is not a statement of quid pro quo that if we remain faithful, then God is obligated to perform rescue operations for us. It is not a treaty that God will provide these services so long as we live up to our duty as followers. Instead, think of Psalm 121 more as a revealing of God's intentions toward us and a revealing of His character. So that when we look for God, here's what we find. We find a God who seems to enjoy creating. We find a God who enjoys watching over us. God who does not make harm go away, but instead stands with us when harm inevitably shows up. A God who does not grow weary of watching us, but remains steadfast toward us, even when we do not remain steadfast toward Him. And as the Psalm says, this is a God who keeps us. Did you notice that? The word keep shows up 6 times in these short 8 verses. Another way of translating that Hebrew word into English would be to say that God stands guard over us. We serve a God who has an intimate, caring investment in our growing and maturing into the image in which we were originally created. How, therefore, should a 21st century Christian read Psalm 121 in both a corporate sense and in an individual spiritual sense? Well, what if Psalm 121 is a prayer of blessing? Here's what I mean. Oftentimes, you all have participated in this worship when a mission team that we're about to send out gathers up here at the front, and we ask you to extend your hands forward as we pronounce a blessing over them. We're asking God to do the same things that the author of Psalm 121 is seeking. That when they look up for God's help, they'll discover that He's already there. But what about on a personal, spiritual level? Let me share one very personal story with you. Most of you know that I did not come to Christ until I was an adult, 28 years old. And I was under the tutelage of a pastor named Reverend Walt Beckwith. To give you an idea about Walt, imagine fire and brimstone, but without the damnation. That's what Walt was like. And man, did he grab my attention. And after my conversion experience, I came back and told him all about it, and he decided that I would be his student. See, Walt had 4 sons, none of whom went into the ministry. And he decided to adopt me as his 5th son, the one who would follow in his footsteps. And so I went to numerous Bible studies under Walt. And after I left that church to go into seminary, I kept up with Walt. And when I was in my 3rd church in Goliad, Texas, we discovered that Walt had had a brain aneurysm and was not going to live much longer. And so I asked Walt if he would do something special for me. There's a story in the Bible about Elijah and Elisha. And Elijah is about to be taken up in the chariot, and Elisha says, well, I want you to do something for me. He says, I want you to bless me. I want you to bless me. I went to Walt and I said, I'd like you to do that. I'd like you to come to Goliad and lay your hands on me in a worship service and bless me, that I might receive what God had given to you. In that worship service, I decided to wear a very special stole. A lot of you have seen the stoles that we wear up here, all different kinds of colors, signifying different times of the year and such. Well, the stole that I was going to wear that day was from Aunt Esther. This is Susan's great aunt, who was a Methodist minister, starting in 1929 as a deaconess. and retiring as a full elder in 1974. When she was 90, we went up to Nebraska to visit her and to see her. And I basically, for a week, sat at the feet of Aunt Esther and listened to her tell all kinds of stories. Her body was crippled, but her mind was still incredibly sharp. And after she passed away, she had no family. She had no children of her own, no relatives. And so she willed all of her pasture possessions to me, including her stole. And so when this time came in Goliad for Walt to lay his hands on me and to bless me, I decided to wear Aunt Esther's stole. It was an incredibly powerful moment. Two people who had been in the ministry over 100 years between the two of them, laying their hands and that stole over me in a powerful spiritual moment. But it also had just a tinge of humor to it. You see, Aunt Esther was smaller than me. She's a very short lady. And the stole that she willed to me is actually quite lengthy. And so you can imagine this little 4'10" lady wearing this thing. I mean, it doesn't fit me. And so what she would do is she would wear a cinch, and she would, kind of tuck this into the cinch sometimes. And other times she would take this and she would wrap it around so it would come up over one shoulder and the other one on the other side. So I had this gigantic thing on my shoulders and knelt down at the altar rail in front of that altar at Goliad. And there with the presence of Aunt Esther and the hands of Walt Beckwith, he pronounced a Psalm 121 blessing over me. It was powerful. And so today what I thought I would do is pass this on. I want to bless all of you with Psalm 121. I'm going to read Psalm 121 over you today. And I'm going to ask you to receive it as God watching over you and keeping you. Not to protect you from every big or little thing that ever might oppose you in life or make you distressed, but to know that God walks with you in any and all circumstances. That there would never be a doubt in your mind that God is there, that there is never any question that you are loved by God. That in your heart, in your mind, and your soul, you know as a fact of life and faith that God is watching you and keeping you. Instead of extending your hands out towards one another or coming up here for Clay and I to lay hands on you, I'm going to ask that you do this in a different way. I'm going to ask that you take your hands and you form a cup with them pointed upwards, as if you are going to receive this blessing from God as God pours it out of a pitcher, and that you're trying to catch it like a cup, only it just keeps filling up and running over the edges with this promise. And so as we conclude this sermon, this is what I want you to do. Assume this position of prayer with your hands cupped, aimed towards heaven, and receive this blessing from Psalm 121. Let's pray. God will not let your foot be moved. God who keeps you will not slumber. God who kept Israel will neither sleep nor slumber. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all evil, and He will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time and forevermore. Let all God's people say, Amen.